So let's dive in. And my goal is just to give you some things to chew on, and then to go out and get smarter together around this topic of succession planning. My big point is this: succession planning starts now. It starts now. I thought about this years ago. In fact, there was in my first book, Dying to Lead, I wrote a chapter called "Who Will Lead Next." And I thought about a college president that I know, and I thought, thinking about his first day in the job, and he told me, he said, the moment I entered the job is the moment the succession planning process started. And the reality is, though, that most of us didn't start early enough. So I don't want you to beat yourself up if you didn't start early and first thing, but I think if we should start now. The second question is this, and it is this. There's sort of here's my litmus test for how you're doing. If you get hit by a bus tomorrow, what happens for the people left in your world? I know it's kind of morbid, but I think it's kind of fun to go extreme for just a moment to think about it that way. If you're hit by a bus tomorrow, what happens for the people in your world? If there's one thing that I am, my family calls me, I hate this name, by the way, Practical Patty. And one of the reasons they call me that is because I'm sort of cursed with strategic forward vision. And so it's this, I'm always preparing for uncertainties. You can never be quite prepared enough. And it is kind of annoying, to be honest, because every person that's ever worked with me has been asked that question. If you're hit by a bus tomorrow, can you set up systems in a way that someone could just pick up what you do? Because it creates sustainability for the organization in an unselfish kind of way. I know it's kind of extreme to think about it that way. It's also interesting to think about succession planning from this standpoint, is that it's connected to so many things. Like, we're all about whole and intentional leader development. It gets you thinking about whole organization development that I would suggest is really driven by whether or not we're doing whole leader development in the first place. But it's connected to so many things. Do you have a clear strategy? Do you know where you're going? Do you have an intentional culture that you are building? Do you know the people on your team? Are you being thoughtful about selection? So selection plays a role in this. Do you understand, do the people who are around you understand their own competencies and the purpose behind what they do? So it is a whole conversation that connects into so much more. I think succession planning is so often simplified, sometimes in too many ways. And here's the other thing, is that oftentimes business owners, I would say, that we work with will start thinking about succession planning at the moment where they're thinking about either they're going to move out of the business or they're preparing for a sale. And so often it's too late then, because now they're scrambling to try to develop successors when actually part of their value proposition is whether or not they had a leadership bench already developed in the first place. We actually talked to some people deep in corporate finance, and they said that one of the 5 key factors is the health of the leadership team in that process. So I got to tell you, this is also pretty purposeful in my own life, in my personal life, because I had a couple of conversations with my wife that were pretty important. So a few years ago, I was getting on a plane and I had a panic moment because I realized that my wife would now be responsible. He knows where everything is. It's all good. Like, just talk to Daniel. He can run this thing like a top. It'll be awesome. We might do better after I'm gone anyway. So this is the conversation I had. This is panic moment. And more recently, now do not shame me, you all, for this. Do not do that. But I will tell you this. I understand the finances of WiLD leaders, like inside and out. I understand all that stuff. I'm responsible here. But when it comes to my personal finances, my wife has managed that for years. So this, a couple of trips ago, we're driving to the airport and I asked the dumbest question. Okay, this is where I don't want you to shame me. I said, "Where's our money?" And my wife said to me, she said, "There is a file in my desk that says, 'If we die' is the label on the file." And I got in there. So when she's on her trip and I look in there and it's like, sure enough, it's all the passwords, it's everything. And then she said this to me on the way to the airport. She said, just pay the bills. To which I thought, what are the bills? Okay, because you got to know what the bills are, right? Because she's paying the bills. I'm not saying I don't know what the bills are, so I'm not an idiot, but I would need to know what's the list of bills, right, in order to live up to this expectation that my wife has for that. So it's something we have to think about. Like, what does it mean to prepare people for when we're gone? But not only that, for different kinds of things too. And by the way, succession planning is such a funny thing. I was working with this organization, and I was sitting down with the VP of talent. It's an organization all of you know, incredible mission. And I asked him, I said, he brought me in because they wanted to do this. They wanted to put a succession planning process in place. And I said, why do you want to do this? I think it's a good question, right? Why do you want to do this? And he said this, he said, our CEO read something about succession planning on the cover of Inc. magazine, so he wants a process. Not a particularly compelling reason. You know what I mean? It's like, what are we even talking about? So I think this is, so let's dive into this a bit. So let me define what we're talking about. And here's the definition. So just take some notes. You don't need to remember all of this, but just on the pieces that might be important to you. For our purposes, succession is defined, succession planning, a process of developing the next generation of leaders to lead when our current generation of leaders is no longer relevant or around or can't be there. Okay, so it's not necessarily that they leave, but they can't be there. That means that short of an enduring memory of our legacy, we're preparing people to lead when the leaders we have can't either be there or they no longer matter. Like on a day-to-day basis. I'm not saying they don't matter. There's something bigger than that. But you know what I mean? It's like, so this is that process. It's a process of doing this earlier and thinking about what that means. And it's interesting. So it's what's the purpose of that? Well, the purpose is to prepare leaders to lead now or after we're gone, and to create a sustainable and adaptable organization going forward. So it's like, this is where the forward, kind of that curse of forward strategic thinking becomes important, because we're trying to think about sustainability. And if we think about it, the moment we enter the job, we end up not having to deal with some of the headaches that might come later. Now, what's interesting about this, and I know some of you, and I know your organizational challenge, is that there's something that comes up in the midst of this, and it's selection. So that whole question of, do you have the right people on the bus? And I know that that's something that probably comes to mind for you. And so so often this question will come up when you ask leaders about who's going to lead next, or in this, as the organization scales, that question comes up: do we have the right leaders here in the first place? Do they fit the culture? Do they have the competence to lead? Are they those right people? And in so many places, we simply don't have the bench. And that's one of the realities, possibly because we may have been thinking about selecting for something maybe different than what we maybe should have. So let me come back to that in just a moment. I think one of the other key things is that this has come up even in conversations I've had with several of you, is this question of, so what are we about? Like, what do we want? And what are we about? And that integration of both, like, what is it? And so many business leaders and organizational leaders and very successful nonprofits or businesses who are doing very well come to this moment where I've got to clarify where we're going. I've got to know, so what is it that I'm trying to accomplish? And it has to go beyond, I'm going to double my revenue. You know, it's like, that's not enough. Now, doubling your revenue may be something that occurs that's going to cause you to have to think about scale. But it's like, what specifically is this about? And it causes this tension to come up. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting as well is that, so selection is one of these key things to think about. Is so beginning to think about it. And I'm going to say one, as we get into some practical steps at the end, I'll say one more thing about that. But it's also this reality. If you think about succession planning, in so many ways, it is whole leader development. Like, it's a leader development process. We just happen to put it in a different box later because we realize, oh, I don't have people that are going to be able to do what I do if I can't be there or if I'm gone. So in many ways, it is whole leader development. So if we just began that process and began the systemic investment in our people earlier, that we actually, succession planning would be just a process that follows on with much more ease. And now, Now, there's something else that's interesting that's a part of this. I want to go just for a second into the whole succession planning from the standpoint of, so often we do think about it like Phil Aronson leaves Phil's business. So Phil's now responsible for thinking about who's going to lead next in the business. And I would say that this, one of the realities of that from a senior leader perspective, where you're exiting a business that probably you've had a significant legacy into, is that there is this sacrificial component. It's something that I'm a little bit wired for, in that, not wired for, I shouldn't say it that way, that my dad grilled into me. My dad, this is the kind of lessons that my dad, who was a 2-time university and a 1-time seminary president, said to me. This is the weird stuff that comes up when I was 10 years old. I don't know how my dad thought this was okay, but it stuck. Was that when you leave, you go. And I can't tell you how many leaders, just over and over and over again, who stick around. I was in a conversation with a nonprofit leader, and again, an organization that all of you would know. And this guy had a significant leadership role and a significant impact. And then he was talking to me about how the new CEO, so he stayed on the board, the new CEO was struggling. And I was thinking to myself, of course he's struggling. You're still here. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, and you have such a powerful legacy, you got to let go at some point. And so that's, I think, something from that standpoint that's often the sacrificial component of that is so interesting. I want to give you, so here are a few things to think about, and maybe some practical steps, because I'm just kind of setting the table. I'd love to know where you go with this. But the first one is what I mentioned before. It's so critical for us to know what we want and to know what our organization needs to work well at scale, at the next level of scale. What is it that you want? In other words, I mean, if someone said it's to create value in my organization so I can sell it, at least we've got some clarity. You know, I'm not sure I'm compelled by that being the number one vision, but I think it's a start. To know what you want. Are you looking for that cash out moment? Are you trying to build a lasting, sustainable organization? Are you trying to grow slowly? Are you trying to grow quickly? What is it that you want? The second thing is this: select for readiness and not just competence. So that's why I said I'd come back to this issue of selection, is that I know, as I've talked with some of you, I'm thinking of 2 of you specifically, where you've got a person who wants to be sitting in your seat. You know what I mean? Who has said, like, I want to do that. I want to be in that job, or whatever that seat is that you have. That conversation cannot take place without a conversation that says, are you willing to make a deep investment in your own development to sit in this seat? Because there's a lot of experiences, young man or woman, that you need to be thinking about that may be necessary for you to sit in this seat well. So it's like, I would say, and making sure not just selecting for, but also inviting readiness. So looking for people who are developmentally ready and not just competent, but then also providing an invitation for the people you already have into their own development in ways that you may not have in the past. That's something that I would also thinking about. And it's like building that into your culture of what everything's about. Development's going to be just what we do. I'm thinking about WiLD. Like, WiLD's created a culture of development in an organization that some would say, like, that isn't normal in our industry. And so you may hear a bit more from WiLD in just a moment. Number 3, put a system in place. You have a system for everything we do, everything you do. So get systematic about allowing people to see and understand, so that every person who may be in that selection, that succession pipeline, might be beginning to think about, what am I motivated by? What are my competencies? What are my blind spots? What experiences have I had? How do I show up? What do I need to do better in how I show up? How is my relationship to my current boss affecting how I show up? I'm thinking of a couple of you I had that conversation with. So that if you have a system in place for seeing people, this is the work we do, right? Most of you know that, is providing that process for people to see one another, so that we can start to develop that bench from the very beginning. And then the last thing is this, and this is the hard one. It's a hard one for me. And I wrote down, get out of the way. Now, I think I want to say that with a little bit of seasoning, because just a little more nuance than that, because I think in many cases it means getting out of the way if you're someone who's actually passing the baton. But you're probably, for most of you, you're still going to be in the picture. And so I think still being in the process is important, but thinking about what it means for you to allow people to invest in someone and at the same time not getting in their way of their own development, because this is that tension when we're developing successors. The reality is they're going to develop through their own crucible experiences that they probably have to have on their own. And it's a fascinating thing because the research supports that, but organizations who have tried to do succession planning using that research about development through crucibles oftentimes have tried to make it so, like, they take a person who's maybe a 50-50 chance they're going to succeed in a role. They call this like job fills. And then they surround them with 100% success people. So they surround them with people where they really can't fail. Well, the reality is that someone has to be in that moment where they're going to experience some of that tension in order to truly develop the capacity to do it well, which is always a risk. You know what I mean? Like developing people at that level is a risk, because now I'm like, when is the appropriate risk to take? We talk about this all the time with our team, with different teams that we work with, and to make sure we're developing our bench of people that can work with your teams. So those are just a few things. Know what you want, select for readiness and not just competence, put a system in place, and then get out of the way, or figure out what it means to still be in the conversation, not getting in the way, would be another way to think about